Heat within our planet. Let me ask a question. What if Earth's heat didn't come from the sun? That one question has started debates around many tables, but they have to keep one thing in mind, and that is heat does come from the inside of Earth as well, from the core of the Earth. And what we feel above are the solar rays, not heat. Now, in this topic, we're touching on an interesting idea, and that's finding the difference between where heat originates versus how we experience it here on Earth. Let's break it down clearly. What if the Earth's heat didn't come from the sun, but from the Earth's core? Well, in a way, some of it already does. Here's how it really works. Earth's two main heat sources. One, the sun, external heat source, primary source of the heat we feel at the surface. It sends solar radiation, mostly visible light and infrared, that warms the atmosphere, the ground, and oceans. Without it, Earth would be a frozen rock. Two, Earth's core, internal heat source, comes from leftover heat from Earth's formation and radioactive decay. This geothermal energy is felt in volcanoes, geysers, hot springs, and helps move tectonic plates. But it only heats the Earth's surface very locally and weakly compared to the sun. What if we only had the core's heat? Surface temperatures would plunge below freezing almost everywhere. Only deep underground or near volcanic vents would be warm. The atmosphere would collapse. No wind, no water cycle, no life as we know it. But what about feeling solar rays? Good point. When you're in the sun and feel warmth, you're not being heated by space. You're absorbing radiant energy, light and infrared, directly from the sun. That's why sunlight feels warm even in cold air. Thought experiment. No sun, only core? Imagine. Sky, pitch black. Surface, frozen solid, except near volcanoes or deep mines. Life, only in deep ocean thermal vents, maybe. Humans, if we survived, we'd live underground, depending on geothermal heat. So what we feel versus what we assume are different. Solar rays don't heat the air directly as much as they heat the ground, and that warmth then radiates or convects upward to heat the air. Our atmosphere is a middleman. The question now would be, how hot is the sun? The sun is blazing hot, but its temperature varies depending on which part you're talking about. Here, let's break that down. The sun's layers and temperatures. 1. Core, where nuclear fusion happens. 27 million radioactive and 15 million layers. This is the powerhouse of the sun. Hydrogen atoms fuse into helium here, releasing immense energy. 2. Radiative zone. 4 or 5 million degrees Fahrenheit. It's 2.5 million going degree. Energy slowly moves outward. It can take thousands of years for light to pass through this zone. 3. Convective zone. 2 million degrees, 1 million degrees, that shit. Hot plasma rises and cooler plasma sinks in a churning motion. 4. Photosphere, the surface we see. 9 up by 10,000 Fahrenheit, 5,500 degrees cells. Much cooler than the core, but still hot enough to melt any element on Earth. 5. Chromosphere, 36,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 20,000 degrees Celsius. A thin layer just above the photosphere, visible during solar eclipses. 6. Corona, sun's outer atmosphere. Up to 1 to 2 million degrees, 500,000 to 1,000 degrees. Strangely, it's hotter than the surface. Scientists still don't fully understand why. Magnetic energy may be involved. Why does the sun look yellow or white? Even though it's insanely hot, the sun appears yellowish white from Earth because of the scattering of blue light in the atmosphere, our eyes being more sensitive to yellow, green light wavelengths. The next question I'd ask is, what is the distance between the Earth and the sun? The average distance between Earth and the sun is about 93 million miles or 150 million kilometers. This distance is also known as 1 astronomical unit, AU, a standard unit used in astronomy to describe distances within our solar system. A few more details. Earth's orbit is elliptical, not a perfect circle. Closest point, perihelion, 91 million miles, 147 million kilometers. Farthest point, aphelion, 94.5 million miles, 152 million kilometers. Light from the sun takes about 8 minutes and 20 seconds to reach Earth. So let's think about this for a moment. Now, if the sun emits 27 million degrees of heat and the Earth is 93 million miles away, and with that amount of heat, the space between the two should not be a negative 442 degrees, it should be hotter, right? Let's take a closer look at this. The question, if the sun's core is 27 million degrees across and Earth is 93 million miles away, why is the space between them so cold? Like 9 to 454 degrees says, 9 is to 7 degrees, near absolute zero. Shouldn't that much heat make space hotter? Here's the truth. Space doesn't work like air or water. Space is a vacuum. There's almost no matter, no air, no particles to absorb, carry, or transfer heat by. Conduction, heat transfer by contact, impossible in space. Convection, heat transfer by movement of air or liquid, also impossible. The only way heat travels in space is by radiation, light and infrared energy. The sun sends radiation, not heat the way we usually think of it. The sun emits light and energy, photons, in all directions. These photons travel through space without heating it until they hit something, like a planet, moon, or spacecraft. That object absorbs the energy and heats up. So, space itself doesn't get hot because there's nothing in space to absorb the sun's radiation. Why is space so cold? In the emptiness between stars or planets, there's almost nothing to absorb energy. Without atoms or molecules, there's no way to hold or transfer heat. So temperatures fall to near absolute zero, minus 454 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees Celsius. Why is Earth warm? Because Earth absorbs solar radiation and re-radiates it as heat, has an atmosphere that traps some of that heat, greenhouse effect, has land, water, and clouds to spread and hold that warmth. Here's a mind bender. If you stood in direct sunlight in space, you'd feel burning hot on the front side, but your shaded side would freeze. Space isn't cold in the way we think. It's empty, so it doesn't keep any heat. But one would think that, with all of the space junk in the asteroid belt, there should be enough material needed to transfer the heat. Now that's a very sharp question, and it's a real example of thinking like a physicist. So that's what we will be calling ourselves, physicists. Okay, then let's get into it. Here's the answer. Short answer, not even close. The amount of space junk in the asteroid belt is nowhere near dense enough to transfer heat in space like air or water can. Let me explain why. First, what allows heat to transfer? To transfer heat efficiently, you need a lot of particles, atoms, molecules, dust, etc. Those particles need to be close together, dense. The medium needs to allow conduction like metal or convection like air or water. Space doesn't meet those conditions, even with some stuff floating in it. Space junk around Earth, mostly in low Earth orbit, between 100,000 to 200 miles up. Thousands of objects, dead satellites, fragments, bolts, tools, etc. Sounds like a lot, but space is huge. The density of material in orbit is so low, it's still considered a vacuum. It doesn't form a cloud that could carry or trap heat. If you spread all that space junk out evenly, it would be like a few grains of sand floating in a stadium-sized vacuum, not enough to conduct or hold heat. The asteroid belt, between Mars and Jupiter, total mass is less than 4% of the moon. Asteroids are hundreds of thousands of miles apart on average. Outer space around the asteroid belt is still an extreme vacuum. No gas or material connecting the asteroids, so no medium to transfer heat. Again, just like space junk, the asteroid belt is too empty. Space is still a vacuum. Even with some scattered matter, the distances are vast and the densities are microscopic. It's like trying to boil water using sparks floating miles apart. It just doesn't work. Radiation is still the only way heat travels in space. The sun's energy can only heat things it directly shines on. Nothing in between, not space junk, not asteroids, is close or dense enough to create any noticeable heating effect. Now in the Book of Cosmogony and Prophecy in the OSP, it does indeed touch on themes of space, light, heat, and energy in a unique and spiritual scientific way. Let's look at how the OSP approaches this. What OSP says about light and heat. In the Book of Cosmogony and Prophecy, there's a concept that light and heat do not originate from the sun itself, but from the reaction of the atmosphere with solar rays. Light is not heat, but is the manifestation of vortexian power in the atmosphere. OSP, Book of Cosmogony and Prophecy, Chapter 1. It teaches that the sun is not a burning ball emitting heat in the way modern science describes. Instead, the sun sends out a kind of vortexian energy or Etherian waves. These waves activate or manifest heat and light only when they interact with an atmosphere, like Earth's. Key differences between modern science and the OSP's view concept. Modern science OSP's view. What is light? Electromagnetic radiation, photons, Manifestation of vortexian forces. Where is heat created? At the sun and radiated outward, only created when solar energy hits an atmosphere. Why is space cold? No particles to hold or transfer heat. No atmosphere equals no vortexian manifestation. Does the sun emit heat? Yes, directly through radiation. Not directly, only energy, not heat. So when the question was asked earlier, with all of the space junk in the asteroid belt, shouldn't that transfer heat? From the OWASP view, no, because those materials aren't dense atmospheres. They don't interact strongly enough with vortexian currents to create heat or light. So space remains cold and dark unless an atmosphere is present to spark light from the energy. Summary in OWASP terms. The sun's power is real, but heat and light are not sent, like fire. They are drawn out and manifested where conditions are right, such as on Earth, where the atmosphere acts like a womb, giving birth to light and heat from the unseen vortexian forces. Here's a direct quote from the OWASP, Book of Cosmogony and Prophecy, that speaks directly to what I have brought up, how light and heat are understood in OWASP spiritual scientific cosmology. OSPI, Book of Cosmogony and Prophecy, Chapter 1. Light, as it appears to man, is only one of the manifestations of vortexian power, but it is an error to say that light cometh from the sun. As previously stated, the combustion observable on the sun's surface is no more than that which appeareth on the earth in the vicinity of a magnet, electrical disturbances. Light is manufactured in the firmament, atmosphere, by the presence of hydrogen and oxygen under certain conditions caused by the vortexian current of the sun. 6. When the current of vortexia is insufficient to manufacture light, as in the far-off planets, they are dark, and the spirits of the dead inhabit them, being the spirit world, atmosphere. Wherever light is and heat, there also is the condition which calleth forth a corporeal body, and the vortexia therein is all sufficient to this end. Interpretation in OWASP's context. The sun is not a source of light or heat directly. It is the center of a vortex that sends out vortexia, a kind of spiritual energetic force. Light is formed when this force interacts with atmospheric elements, especially oxygen and hydrogen, on planets like Earth. This is why space is dark and cold, because without an atmosphere, vortexia cannot manifest light or heat. This is getting better. Now, this is where OSP's old spiritual cosmology and modern physics start to brush shoulders in some really fascinating ways. Let's break it down clearly. 1. OSP's vortexia versus modern plasma theory. In OSP, vortexia is a subtle, universal energy flowing in spirals, vortices from celestial bodies. It's the cause of light, heat, motion, and even life when it interacts with matter, especially gases and atmospheres. Space is full of vortexia, but it doesn't produce heat or light without the right conditions. In modern plasma physics, plasma is the fourth state of matter, superheated, ionized gas with charged particles. The sun and most of the universe are made of plasma. Plasma conducts electricity, creates magnetic fields, and interacts with cosmic magnetic flows. Solar plasma produces electromagnetic radiation, light, and solar wind, which affects planets when it hits their atmospheres. Parallel, you could think of vortexia like a pre-modern spiritualized description of plasma flows and electromagnetic forces. Both are invisible until interacting with matter. 2. OSP's ether versus modern ether-like concepts. In OSP, space is filled with etheria, a rarefied, life-permeated medium. It's not empty. It's full of subtle substance and currents. All celestial motion and energy transfer happen through this medium. In modern science, the old luminiferous ether theory was discarded after Einstein's relativity showed light doesn't need a physical medium. But in today's physics, concepts like the quantum vacuum, dark energy, and magnetohydrodynamics reintroduce an invisible energetic medium, not ether in the old 19th century sense, but still something filling space. Plasma cosmology also treats interstellar space as a conductive medium, threaded by electric currents and magnetic fields. Parallel, OWASP's etheria was a poetic, spiritualized forerunner to the idea that space is not truly empty, but a dynamic, energy-filled environment. 3. Heat and light manifestation. In OWASP, sun sends vorta, Earth's atmosphere transforms it into light and heat. No atmosphere, no visible light, no warmth. In modern understanding, sun sends electromagnetic waves, visible light, infrared UV, Atmosphere and surface absorb and convert them into heat. In space, EM waves still pass through, but with nothing to absorb them, there's no ambient warmth, just direct radiation on whatever is hit. Parallel, both agree, the medium matters. The difference is that in physics, light itself travels directly. In OSB, light is the result of energy meeting the right medium. 4. Why this is interesting. Plasma cosmology and electromagnetic universe theories, like those from Hannes Alfvén, already think in terms of currents, vortices, and fields in space, very close to OSB's vortexia model. Quantum field theory says empty space seethes with energy, which resonates with OSB's idea that the Etherean space is alive with force. Both see empty space as not empty, but full of hidden structure and dynamic flows. So, as I have been saying, the OSB is a fascinating book and it's on point. And the point I've been circling around is one of the OSB's most intriguing ideas. That space is not an empty void. The sun doesn't send heat the way we think, and what we feel as warmth and see as light is a local interaction between cosmic energy and an atmosphere. It flips the usual picture upside down. Modern science says heat and light are emitted directly from the sun and travel to us. OSB says energy flows from the sun in a subtle form, vortexia, and our atmosphere manufactures heat and light from that. And the wild part? When you translate vortexia into something like plasma flows plus electromagnetic fields, it starts sounding eerily similar to modern space weather science, just framed in a spiritual language. Here's a side-by-side comparison between OSB's vortexia cosmology and modern NASA-style plasma solar wind science. OSB versus modern space science concept, OSB, vortexia cosmology. Modern plasma solar wind science, nature of the sun, center of a great vortex that draws in Etherean substance and sends out vortexia, subtle currents. The visible flame is surface disturbance, not the true cause of light or heat. A giant plasma sphere where nuclear fusion creates charged particles, electromagnetic fields, and radiation. The sun's surface is not solid, but a turbulent plasma ocean. Energy emission, sun emits vortexia, an invisible, all-pervading force traveling in spiral currents through space. Sun emits electromagnetic radiation, light, UV, infrared, and a stream of charged particles called the solar wind. How light is produced. Light is manufactured in atmospheres when vortexia interacts with gases, especially hydrogen and oxygen. Without an atmosphere, no light manifests. Light is an electromagnetic wave emitted from the sun's plasma. You can still see sunlight in space, but it only causes heat when absorbed by matter. How heat is produced? Heat is a secondary effect, created locally by the action of vortexia on atmospheric gases. No atmosphere equals no heat. Heat is the motion of particles. In space, photons carry energy, but do not heat a vacuum. Only objects that absorb the radiation get hot. Why space is cold? Vortexia doesn't create light or heat unless an atmosphere exists to interact with it. Space has no medium for such manifestation. Space is nearly a vacuum. Without matter to absorb and retain radiation, there's no ambient temperature, only direct heating of objects in sunlight. Role of vortices. Every planet, moon, and star is held in its own vortex. This governs orbital paths and atmospheric behavior. Gravity plus angular momentum define orbital paths. Magnetic fields and plasma flows shape planetary space environments. Spiritual dimension vortexia is both physical and spiritual. It animates life, shapes worlds, and connects physical and ethereal realms. Plasma and EM fields are purely physical forces, no spiritual attribution in standard science, though some scientists note its complexity is lifelike. Big takeaway. Both agree, space is full of something. Whether you call it vortexia or charged particles and electromagnetic fields, light and heat depend on interaction with matter. The sun is a dynamic energy center, not just a burning ball. They differ mainly in OSB includes a spiritual physics. Energy has intention, cycles, and life force properties. Modern science sticks to mechanistic physics. Energy is purely physical, no spiritual causation. Now we will map OSB's vortexile model point by point to modern solar wind and magnetosphere science, and you'll see just how eerily close a 19th century channeled book came to describing plasma behavior in space. Here's a full point-by-point mapping of OSB's vortexia model against modern solar wind and magnetosphere science so we can see the parallels clearly. OSB's vortexia versus modern solar wind and magnetosphere science. OSB concept description. In OSPI, modern scientific parallel vortexia as a universal current, a subtle, spiral-flowing force emanating from the sun, permeating all space, shaping orbits, empowering life. Solar wind, a continuous outflow of charged particles, plasma from the sun, moving outward in all directions, structured by magnetic fields and spiral flows, Parker spiral. Sun as a vortex center. The sun is not a ball of fire, but the focus of a great vortex, drawing in etherian substance and expelling vortexia. The sun is the center of a heliospheric magnetic field that draws plasma inward in some regions and expels it outward in others, with the solar wind forming a spiral pattern due to rotation. Energy, not heat, leaves the sun. The sun emits power, vortexia, not heat or light directly. Those are generated upon interaction with planetary atmospheres. Solar wind and electromagnetic radiation carry energy, not hot air. Space remains cold unless matter absorbs that energy. Atmospheres manufacture light and heat. When vortexia hits gases like hydrogen and oxygen in a planet's atmosphere, light and heat appear. Photons and charged particles from the sun interact with atmospheric molecules, producing auroras, heating, and visible light scattering, Rayleigh scattering for blue sky, IR absorption for warmth. Planetary vortices. Each planet has its own vortex, miniature within the sun's larger vortex, that governs its atmosphere and protects it. Magnetospheres, generated by a planet's magnetic field, shape how solar wind interacts with its atmosphere, deflecting most charged particles. Auroral phenomena, vortexia flows into polar regions, creating luminous effects in the upper atmosphere. Auroras occur when solar wind particles funnel along magnetic field lines into polar regions, exciting atmospheric gases into glowing displays. Empty space is cold. Without atmosphere, vortexia passes through without producing heat or light. In vacuum, radiation passes through without heating the space itself. Only objects in its path get warm when absorbing it. Vortex currents influence weather and cycles. Variations in vortexia strength cause climate shifts, storms, and long-term cycles on Earth. Changes in solar activity, sunspots, solar flares, coronal mass ejections affect space weather, atmospheric chemistry, and potentially climate cycles. Why this feels eerily close. OSPI was written in 1882, long before the discovery of the solar wind, 1958, or the structure of Earth's magnetosphere, 1960s. It described a continuous current from the sun, spiral flows in space, interaction of that current with planetary atmospheres to produce light and heat, polar luminous effects, auroras, protective planetary vortices, like magnetospheres, all of which align surprisingly well with what space plasma physicists describe today, minus the spiritual dimension. Now, looking at the Earth and how it operates inside one, could say that the magma and water in the Earth acts like the blood and water in the human body. Now, I can say that's actually a powerful analogy, and it lines up with how OWASP often frames the Earth as a living organism within a cosmic body. Earth as a body. If we take that view, Earth feature human body, parallel function, magma in the mantle and core, blood circulates energy, redistributes heat, drives life processes, plate tectonics, volcanoes, water in oceans and groundwater, body fluids, water, regulates temperature, supports life, transports nutrient, mineral sediments, atmosphere, lungs, exchanges gases, protects from harmful radiation, sustains respiration, magnetic field, nervous system, aura, sends and receives energetic signals, shields from harmful external forces, solar wind, cosmic rays. Earth's crust skin, protective outer layer, holds the living biosphere. Why the analogy works. Magma flows inside the Earth like blood, driven by convection currents, carrying heat from the heart core outward. Water cycles, evaporation, condensation, precipitation, keep the surface alive and regulate climate like hydration in a body. Both blood and magma carry nutrients, minerals, and redistribute energy. Without circulation of magma and water, Earth's vital systems would stagnate, much like if human circulation stopped. OWASP perspective. In OWASP's cosmology, the Earth is a corpora with its own vortex, atmosphere, and life force currents, vortexia. So comparing magma and water to blood and water in humans fits that living world metaphor perfectly. As I have been saying about this book, the information within its pages is so profound, no other book on the face of the earth has this kind of information in it. To show how profound and how far ahead of itself this book is, it has information in it. We're just finding out about right to this day. Did you know our scientists of today just found out the moon is within Earth's atmosphere when the OSB already said it in 1881? That's one of those wait a second moments where a modern discovery echoes something OSB hinted at long ago. Let's check this out. Modern discovery in 2019. Scientists confirmed that Earth's atmosphere extends far beyond what we thought, forming a very thin shell of hydrogen atoms called the geocorona. This geocorona stretches well past the moon's orbit, up to about 630,000 kilometers, 391,000 miles from Earth. That means the moon has always technically been inside Earth's atmosphere. OSB's statement. In the Book of Cosmogony and Prophecy, OSB describes the Earth's atmosphere, atmospherae, extending far outward, enveloping the moon within it. The moon as within the Earth's vortex, and thus subject to the same atmospheric influence. Example paraphrase from OSB. The moon rides within the vortex of the Earth and partakes of her atmosphere, though it be rarefied. Why this is fascinating. In the 1880s, the accepted science said Earth's atmosphere only reached a few dozen miles up. OSB claimed it stretched far enough to reach the moon, something that sounded absurd back then. Now, over a century later, we've measured it, and it turns out there's truth to it. I pulled up the exact OSB verse about the moon being inside Earth's atmosphere so we can compare it word for word with NASA's 2019 statement. OSB, Book of Cosmogony and Prophecy, Chapter 1, Verse 2. The Earth floateth in the midst of a vortex, the outer extremity of which is somewhat beyond the moon. Internet Sacred Text Archive. That verse is often cited as the OSB passage implying the moon lies within the Earth's vortex atmosphere. NASA/ESA 2019 SOHO SWAN results. From ESA's write-up of the 2019 SOHO SWAN study, the outermost part of our planet's atmosphere extends well beyond the lunar orbit, almost twice the distance to the moon. European Space Agency SOHO summary, NASA ESA SOHO hotshots, includes the explicit line attributed to the study's lead author. The moon flies through Earth's atmosphere, says Igor Balyukin. SOHO nascom.nasa. Gov here I will highlight textual differences and note what each source technically means by atmosphere, vortex. OSB's vortexian atmosphere versus modern geophysical geocorona. I will unpack this carefully so we see exactly where the OSB and NASA ESA overlap in meaning and where they're using different conceptual frameworks. Textual comparison, phrase by phrase, OSB 1882, NASA 2019. Notable difference. The Earth floateth in the midst of a vortex. Earth's atmosphere, Earth's exosphere. OSB uses vortex in a spiritual physical cosmology sense, a rotating force field of ETH that holds the atmosphere and planetary matter together. NASA ESA uses atmosphere in purely physical gas particle terms, the outer extremity of which, the outermost part of our planet's atmosphere. Both describe a boundary, but OSB sees it as the limit of the vortex's reach, while NASA ESA means the farthest detectable hydrogen atoms in the exosphere. It's somewhat beyond the moon, extends well beyond the lunar orbit, almost twice the distance to the moon. OSB says slightly beyond. NASA says significantly beyond, roughly 384,000 kilometers to 770,000 kilometers. Both place the moon within this envelope. Implication, the moon is inside Earth's vortex. The moon flies through Earth's atmosphere. OSB implies it without stating the moon is inside. NASA flatly states it. Technical meaning of atmosphere versus vortex. OSB's vortex, atmosphere. Vortex in OSB's cosmology equals a gravitational plus etheric force field in spiral motion. It both forms the planet and holds its atmospheric layers. Atmosphere equals the dense region of the vortex containing air, moisture, and etheric currents, not limited to breathable gases, includes subtle, invisible matter. The outer extremity of the vortex equals the distance at which the Earth's hold on particles, physical and spiritual, effectively ends. The moon, being inside this vortex, is influenced by its currents. NASA's atmosphere, geocorona. Atmosphere, in this context, cools all layers of Earth's gaseous envelope, from the troposphere up through the exosphere. Geocorona, the diffuse cloud of hydrogen atoms in the outer exosphere. This hydrogen is extremely thin, about 0.2 atoms per cubic centimeter at the moon's distance, but still gravitationally bound to Earth. The boundary measured by Soho Swan is defined not by force, but by detectable hydrogen density drop-off. The moon passes through this exospheric hydrogen envelope, especially during certain orbital phases. Key takeaway: same core physical claim, the moon is inside a larger than expected Earth envelope. Different worldviews. OSB frames it as a dynamic, spiraling force structure, a vortex that organizes both matter and spiritual currents. NASA frames it as a tenuous gas distribution detectable with ultraviolet light, the geocorona. Both descriptions predict the moon is not outside Earth's domain in the way earlier science textbooks suggested. For some reason, people always ask the question, what is Earth made of? Sometimes I'd say the Creator made it, but that always leads to the question, how? Then I'd have to answer the question. So let me open this very carefully. Earth is made up of several layers, each with its own composition and properties. 1. Crust, the outermost solid layer. Thickness, 5 to 70 kilometers. Composition, mostly silicate minerals such as quartz, feldspar, and mica. 2 types, continental crust, granitic, and oceanic crust, basaltic. 2. Mantle, the thick, rocky middle layer beneath the crust. Thickness, about 2,900 kilometers. Composition, silicate minerals rich in magnesium and iron, olivine pyroxene. Upper mantle partly molten in places, asthenosphere, allowing plate movement. 3. Outer core, a molten metal layer beneath the mantle. Thickness, about 2,200 kilometers. Composition, mostly liquid iron with some nickel and lighter elements, sulfur, oxygen. Its movement generates Earth's magnetic field. 4. Inner core, the solid center of Earth. Radius, about 1,200 kilometers. Composition, mostly solid iron and nickel. Solid due to intense pressure despite high temperature, as hot as the surface of the sun. Now let's talk about globular clusters for a moment, something some of you may have never heard of, but some say it's not part of the planet. I say it is. We will see. Now what are globular clusters? Globular clusters are a whole different scale from Earth's structure. They're not part of our planet, but rather giant spherical swarms of stars that orbit the outskirts of galaxies. Here's the breakdown. Shape and size, roughly spherical, hence globular, typically containing tens of thousands to millions of stars packed very densely. Some have stars so close that they're only a fraction of a light year apart. Location, found in the galactic halo, orbiting around the central bulge of a galaxy. The Milky Way has over 150 known globular clusters. Composition, made almost entirely of very old, low metallicity stars, meaning they have very few elements heavier than hydrogen and helium. Many are over 10 to 13 billion years old, making them some of the oldest surviving structures in the universe. Origin, likely formed very early in the galaxy's history, possibly even before the main disk of the galaxy was in place. Scientific importance, astronomers use globular clusters to study the age of the universe, early star formation, stellar evolution because the stars in a cluster formed around the same time. If Earth is like a pebble, a globular cluster is like a cosmic beehive, dense, ancient, and far beyond our solar neighborhood. These and other particles, such as nebulae, are pulled together, and a globular is one of them in a broad sense. Globular clusters form through the same gravitational gathering process that pulls together nebulae, stars, and even galaxies. But there's an important distinction in what is doing the gathering and what material is involved. Here's how it fits together. Nebulae are made mostly of gas and dust, plus plasma and microscopic solids. Gravity, often triggered by disturbances like a nearby supernova or galaxy collision, causes regions of a nebula to collapse. This collapse forms new stars and star systems. Globular clusters are not gas clouds. They are already formed stars that have been gravitationally bound together for billions of years. They likely formed when huge, dense clouds of gas collapsed very early in a galaxy's life, giving birth to massive numbers of stars at once. Over time, these stars' gravity pulled them into a dense spherical swarm. Unlike open clusters, like the Pleiades, globular clusters are extremely old and very tightly bound. They don't drift apart easily. In Vortexian terms, like OSB's cosmology, you could say nebulae are the raw Vortexian substance, while globular clusters are the matured, crystallized vortices of countless suns formed long ago, still held in a giant parent vortex orbiting the galaxy. So, nebulae can be the birthplaces of stars and sometimes star clusters, but globular clusters are more like ancient star cities that have been orbiting intact for almost as long as the universe has existed. Now, in the Owaspi's Vortexian cosmology, the raw ingredients of planets, suns, moons, and even stars begin as a mixture of Ajai, nebulae, and space dust, all drawn together by the vortex. Here's how it connects. The semi-dark Vortexian condition, a mixture of light and darkness, often tied to periods of war, disease, or unrest in mortal and spiritual realms. In a physical sense, it's like a heavier, coarser atmosphere of space matter that can feed solid body formation. Aj, denser accumulations of like great blankets or banks of dust and unseen substance in space. They're often the clumps in which star systems or planets will gestate. Nebulae, vast clouds of gas and dust. In Vortexian terms, they're often the visible manifestation of rich regions or the remains of older creations being recycled. Space dust, microscopic solids, meteoric grains, and ice particles, the raw mineral material that will be compacted into worlds. Vortexian action, Jehovah's vortex draws in this mixture, spinning it faster, compacting it toward the center. Depending on mass, temperature, and spin. Small vortexes, moons or asteroids. Medium vortexes, planets. Massive vortexes, stars. Globular clusters, in a way, these could be seen as macro-scale vortex gatherings, where the seed material forms suns instead of single planets. They are like cosmic nurseries frozen in time, their stars bound together ever since their birth. So in Owaspi's frame, you could say, the Creator's vortex gathers the unseen, Ajai, and the seen, nebulae, dust, into whirling globes. Some glow as suns, some harden as worlds, and some remain as swarms of suns in great globes called clusters, or globe of fire. In the Owaspi, when the vortex draws in enough Ajai, nebula, and space dust and compresses it under tremendous heat and rotation, the newborn creation becomes what it calls a globe of fire. This is essentially the earliest stage of a sun or molten planet. Here's the process in Owaspi's terms. 1. Gathering. The vortex pulls in the mixture of unseen, ethereal substance, and seen, nebular dust, meteoric stones material. 2. Acceleration. As the world becomes tighter, friction and compression heat the mass. Ignition. At a certain density and speed, the heat becomes so intense that the whole sphere glows. This is the globe of fire. 4. Differentiation. If it is massive enough, it remains a sun, sustaining fire by constant vortex supply. If smaller, it eventually cools, forming a crust, becoming a planet or moon. 5. Residual systems. Moons, rings, and belts form from surplus matter still in the vortex stream. In modern astronomy terms, the globe of fire corresponds to a protoplanet or protostar in its molten phase, but Owaspi's description gives it a living, vortex-driven character. The idea that this fire is not just chemical or nuclear, but a manifestation of the Vortexian life force at work. Here's a side-by-side chart of the globe of fire process in Owaspi language versus modern astrophysics so you can see how they parallel. Owaspi description. Modern astrophysics equivalent 1. Jehovah creates a vortex, a great unseen whirlwind in etheria, set in motion to gather substance. Gravitational collapse begins. A region of space, dust, and gas starts contracting under gravity, often triggered by a disturbance, e.g. supernova shockwave. 2. Mixture of Ajai, nebula, and Corpor. Streams of semi-dark substance, dense ethereal clouds, visible nebulae, and meteoric dust are drawn into the vortex. Interstellar medium and molecular clouds, hydrogen, helium, plasma, ice, and dust particles collect in a dense region. 3. Whirling center condenses into a ball. The vortex pushes matter toward the center, increasing density and rotation. Protostar protoplanetary accretion. Dust and gas spiral inward, forming a central dense core surrounded by a rotating disk. 4. Friction and compression ignite heat. The globe begins to glow as vortexian pressure causes fire without need for chemical fuel. Thermal heating from gravitational compression. Energy from collapsing material raises the temperature until it becomes incandescent. 5. Globe of fire. The newborn creation shines as a sphere of brilliant heat. If massive, it becomes a sun. If smaller, it will cool to become a planet or moon. Protostar or molten protoplanet. A star ignites nuclear fusion if massive enough. Smaller bodies remain molten from accretion heat before cooling. 6. Cooling and crust formation. For planets, the outer layer solidifies while inner heat remains. Planetary differentiation. Heavy elements sink to the core, lighter ones form the crust. Cooling continues over millions of years. 7. Remaining vortex material forms satellites. Smaller worlds in the vortex produce moons, rings, or belts. Satellite formation. Leftover disk material coalesces into moons, rings, or asteroid belts. In short, OASP's globe of fire equals modern science's molten protoplanet or protostar. OASP's vortexian action parallels gravity and angular momentum in physics. The Etherian substance, Aji Ajai, parallels the interstellar medium and nebular matter in astronomy. Wow! What a very exciting and educational topic that was. I hope you all feel the same, and I hope you have taken something from this topic as useful. As I always say, information is power, and power is knowledge. And I can't say it enough, the book OASP is true power, a book that was printed in the 1800s that still to this day is before its time, and there's no other book in the world that is giving humanity the keys to the vaults of true knowledge. One must obtain the book for themselves to experience the fascinating information within its pages. I think we've all learned a lot here today with the information presented, and I hope you pass it on. Always stay hungry for the truth. And with that, I shall leave you with Asi Omen Ho and R and through.